When we talk about humans' ability to understand the world, it is easy to say that we understand the world differently to other life forms because we have a sense of self-awareness. But what does this actually mean? What does it mean to have a mind? And how is that different to simply having a brain? In this presentation, we will discuss whether or not there is a difference between the physical body and the mind. We will touch on physicalism and what it means for something to be real. Property dualism, put simply, is the belief that the properties of our mind are not entirely reducible to our physical body. In this scenario, your mind encompasses everything that makes you the person that you are, your interests, experiences, beliefs, and so on. And your body is just a vessel in which your mind lives. Note that the mind is considered distinct from the brain. Even though synapses and nerve responses explain a lot of a person's responses to things that might happen around them, property dualism asserts that there is something more to our minds, something that cannot solely be explained by physics. But to the physicalist, this is an irrational response to the mind-body problem. Has science not shown us that everything is physical? For a physicalist, a good way to look at it is to compare minds to an image on a screen. The image itself isn't a tangible thing, but instead is made of countless individual pixels that combine to create something bigger. This is similar to how you could argue that the mind is a combination of millions of neurons in the brain. David Lewis's theory of supervenience states that the mind is something that supervenes over neuron activity. Just like images on a screen, minds are completely dependent on brains, and making any change to the brain will have a corresponding effect on the mind. In other words, minds do exist, but they're totally dependent on brains for all of their properties and cannot be considered separately from brains. They are totally reducible to neuron activity. A philosopher called Frank Jackson came up with the thought experiment of Mary in the black and white room in 1982. Imagine Mary has spent her whole life so far in a black and white room where she can only watch a black and white TV and read black and white books. Mary becomes an expert on colour and knows every fact there is to know about colour, but she's never seen it. When Mary finally sees colour for the first time, does she learn something new about it? Jackson says yes, because the experience of seeing a colour like red isn't the same as knowing facts about red. If everything could be explained as physical, then Mary seeing red wouldn't have taught her something new. She would know exactly as much about red as she knew before. But according to Jackson, she gains understanding about red from seeing it. This is an example of qualia, a conscious experience that cannot be explained by physicalism, like a feeling or a sensation. Qualia are properties that are hard to explain because they're individual and subjective, and they can't be explained by physical things. Other examples of qualia are aches and pains, or the taste of certain foods like licorice. Some physicalists might respond to this by saying that the case of Mary can be explained by epiphenomenalism, which means that physical states can cause mental states, but mental states do not control physical states. Physicalists believe that even mental states can be explained by something physical.
The problem of qualia and consciousness can be made even starker if we consider a hypothetical being called a philosophical zombie. Imagine if there existed an exact physical copy of a person that is physically identical to a human in every respect, atom by atom. However, in spite of being physically identical to a human, this being does not have any phenomenal experiences of qualia. When sensory neurons in this being are stimulated, it will give a response that is identical to any other humans, but there is no correlated phenomenal experience. If a philosophical zombie were to pick up a hot plate from the oven, it would scream and put it down just like you or I would, but there would be no subjective experience of pain related to this action. While philosophical zombies probably don't exist, the fact that they are conceivable shows that replicating the physical properties of a thing may not cause the emergence of identical phenomenal properties in its copy. How can mind be said to supervene on the physical like an image on our computer screen supervenes onto the pixels of that screen, if identical physical events do not produce identical phenomenal ones? This is a problem even for epiphenomenology, because even if phenomena are said to be inert byproducts of physical events, it is not clear how or why these byproducts emerge at all. It is here that a physicalist, however, might interject. She might point out that while it is true that we do not have an exact account of how mental events, like experiencing qualia, can supervene on physical events, this does not mean that such an account will not be uncovered in the future. There is an explanatory gap between the physical neurons in the brain and the mental experience of the world, and it is not clear how one might emerge from the other. However, We have not been given conclusive proof that this gap is unsurpassable. It is not entirely unlikely that some progression in the field of neurobiology will someday explain how phenomena emerge from neurons of the brain, just as previous seemingly non-physical events have been explained by physics. It is true that with the help of philosophical zombies we can conceive of an unsurpassable gap between brains and minds, but the conception of this gap does not prove its existence. We may still explain how brains and minds are related to each other in terms of entirely physical properties. So, to conclude, humans are self-aware beings, and our perception of the world is through this lens. However, where does this ability of thought and perception lay? It is understood that the mind and body are separate entities, one which carries the other, and our ability to perceive takes place in our minds, something possibly more than the sum of its parts. The best example against physicalism is Mary in the black and white room. When Mary finally sees the colour red after becoming an expert in colours, she learns the substance of what red actually is, a substance which seems to exist beyond physical explanation. This qualia, among others, demonstrates the lack of soul physicalism in our experience of everyday reality. We are again shown by the philosophical zombie that a physical copy of someone may lack their experiences of qualia. There is simply not a biological answer yet as to whether the mind is a physical or non-physical phenomenon, although there is prima facie evidence from our everyday experiences to suggest a non-physical approach in some respects. So, our question is, does the mind metaphysically depend on the brain, just like images on a screen depend on the pixels? Or is mind something completely irreducible to the physical? What do you think?